Hey everyone, and welcome to the third recording for John Locke. This will take us to the end of our part of the reading, or rather, the end of our reading of an essay concerning human understanding. Um, so this one's looking at sections 18 through to 26, but we do skip most of the 20s through that. So we'll be going from 18 objects of reward and punishment. And so in this last section, John Locke kind of moves the conversation on to, well, how should we consider reward and punishment then of people if self is tied up with consciousness and you have the ability for your body to be doing something but you not being conscious of it, should you be charged with crimes for that? What we're going to see is John Locke saying, well, no, you shouldn't. And to use an example, should you be charged with a crime when you're drunk and you're not conscious of it? No, you shouldn't. But what John Locke points out is that it's basically impossible to actually determine whether someone was conscious or not. You're purely taking them at their word that they either were or were not. And the law is not going to behave like that. So, from a legal point of view, the assumption will be that if your body was there, you were conscious and you were responsible for your actions, and so you'll be punished. Locke says that should the day come when the great judgment occurs, so he's talking about the sort of Judeo-Christian idea of the end of the world, Armageddon, Judgment Day, whatever you want to call it, when God will, uh, look at each of us and determine whether we're good people or not, and will determine whether we have, we have crimes to pay for, and then deal out that punishment if necessary. John Locke talks about that being sort of the time when real punishment will take place, because it's, in theory at least, the one time when the true, the truth of whether you were consciously present for a crime or not is revealed. So we get a little bit of talk about Judgment Day in this section, but yeah, most of it is, what's to be done with questions to do with justice, with Locke's idea of self. So we'll start off with section 18. This is the start of his talking about justice. It does continue on from the last recording, which finished with section 17. If you remember, Locke was talking about, if we removed a finger and your consciousness went along with that finger, then the self has gone along with that finger as well. It hasn't stayed with the rest of the body. So he's going to be talking about that idea a bit, just to remind you. In terms of crimes of, say, a past life or a previous incarnation, if you remember them, they're yours and you should be punished for them. But if you don't, then they're not, and you don't deserve punishment for that. So let's kick off the reading. 18 is pretty short, so we'll be done with this pretty quickly, but here we go. 18 objects of reward and punishment. In this personal identity is founded all the right and justice of reward and punishment, happiness and misery being that for which everyone is concerned for himself, and not mattering what becomes of any substance not joined to it or affected with that consciousness. So what he's saying here is, we all want to be happy and we all want to avoid misery. That is sort of what we perceive, like, not necessarily the goal of life, but maybe the desire of life is a better way to think about it. It's what we all want. And we want that for us, the self, okay, and whatever is connected to our consciousness. For as it is evident in the instance I gave but now, if the consciousness went along with the little finger when it was cut off, that would be the same self which was concerned for the whole body yesterday as making part of itself, whose actions then it cannot but admit as its own now. So what he's talking about here is the little finger that was cut off and the self went with it, is now, in terms of, well, what is the concerns of the self? Well, it's really, in terms of the physical body, it's just the little finger now, because it doesn't associate the self with the rest of the body. However, yesterday, when the finger was still connected, it was concerned with, say, the happiness or misery of the entire body, because the self was connected with all of that. So he's just pointing out that whatever your self is linked to is what you kind of care about, or what you concern yourself about. Though if the same body should still live and immediately from the separation of the little finger have its own peculiar consciousness, whereof the little finger knew nothing, it would not at all be concerned for it as a part of itself, or could own any of its actions, or have any of them imputed to him. So imagine your little finger's cut off, the self goes with the little finger, but immediately at that point, a new consciousness springs up in your body, and it goes about, the rest of its life committing crimes. What Locke is pointing out here is that those crimes cannot be considered to be yours. You are no longer the body, nor the new consciousness that's risen up in the body. You are still the same consciousness, that is the self, and that is only concerned at the moment with the little finger. Okay. It sounds a little bit weird to be talking like this about little fingers, with consciousness and that kind of idea, but Locke's just trying to illustrate the point that, again, it's linking back to memory, really. If you've committed crimes and you remember doing them, then they are your crimes. The consciousness that exists in you right now, that is the consciousness that committed those crimes, and it would be right and fair for you in your entirety to be punished for those crimes. If, however, you don't remember those crimes, and if another consciousness were to take over your body and commit a crime, well, those aren't your crimes, and so you shouldn't have to pay for those. Okay, so again, another link here to memory, very important for Locke. Okay. Moving on now to section 19. Locke expands on this idea of justice by using the example of twins. And he says, punishing someone for something that they're not consciously aware of is the equivalent of punishing one twin for the other twin's crime. They look the same, so therefore punishing them is fair? Well, no. And so if you think about yourself, well, if I'm in an unconscious state and commit a crime, I look like me in the person self idea of me. So this is, a strong me with consciousness, as Locke would identify it. I might look like that person, but I'm not. My consciousness was not present. The twin looks like the person who committed the crime, but they weren't. Okay, so number 19, this is just a continuation from before. So this may show us wherein personal identity consists, not in the identity of substance, but, as I have said, in the identity of consciousness. So remember, when Locke uses the word substance, he's talking about our physical existence. Wherein, if Socrates and the present mayor of Queensborough agree, they are the same person. If the same Socrates, waking and sleeping, do not partake of the same consciousness, Socrates waking and sleeping is not the same person. So basically, if you take on a new consciousness when you are sleeping, and the consciousness that exists in you right now is not kind of driving your body, that new consciousness it's a different self, it's a different person. Okay. And to punish Socrates waking for what sleeping Socrates thought and waking Socrates was never conscious of would be no more right than to punish one twin for what his brother twin did, whereof he knew nothing, because their outsides were so like that they could not be distinguished, for such twins have been seen. So imagine, the most perfect example of identical twins as you can imagine. Even their mother can't tell them apart, and that's the level of of similarity we're talking about. Imagine one twin being charged with a crime that the other committed. This is, for Locke, is the equivalent of, and he'll use this example later on, but imagine that you're sleepwalking and you commit a crime, but you are not consciously aware of it at all in any way whatsoever. You shouldn't be charged with that crime. Like the twin example, you look like the person who committed the crime, but you're not, because the person, remember, Locke, person, consciousness, the person who committed the crime is not you. There may have been another person there. There may not have been any person there. There might not have been any consciousness in the body at that time. But what we can say is it wasn't you. It wasn't your consciousness as exists now. Okay. So again, hopefully a nice little short section there from Locke, but hopefully that's pretty straightforward. I think the twin examples a pretty good one to illustrate what he's talking about. So with section 20 now. Locke now moves the conversation on to probably maybe a little bit more realistic examples, which is, well, what happens when and if we commit crimes that we don't remember. People argue that they don't remember committing a crime. People may be drunk. Again, people may be sleepwalking. And what Locke says, somewhat controversially, is, well, no, the person, again, remember, Locke, person, this is a strong term that he's using. For Locke, the person should not be punished for the crime. If no memory exists, then that conscious self did not exist when the crime was committed. Okay, so let's hear what Locke has to say. But yet, possibly, it will still be objected. Suppose I wholly lose the memory of some parts of my life, beyond a possibility of retrieving them, so that perhaps I shall never be conscious of them again. Yet am I not the same person that did those actions, had those thoughts, that I once was conscious of, though I have now forgotten them? To which I answer that we must here take notice what the word I is applied to. So here, Locke is, again, a little bit like Hume. Locke is identifying the trouble that we have when we're talking about personal identity because of the language that we use around it. Am I the same person I was when I was, 20, though I don't remember being 20? Well, for Locke, the first thing that we have to do before we can even attempt to answer that question is we have to determine what the definition of I is. Okay, so the word I is applied to, which in this case is the man only, and the same man being presumed to be the same person. I is easily here supposed to stand for the same person. So what Locke is pointing out here is when people say this, am I the same person I was when I was 20? What they're talking about is what Locke would identifies as the same man or human. Okay, and what I mean by that is their physical substance. Are you the same, human, as you were when you were 20? And, well, based on Locke's definition of this idea of, particles connected through a continuation of life, yes, you are. You haven't died and come back from the dead at any point during those years, and so, yes, you are. But this is often confused with the idea of person, which, remember, Locke defines very specifically. So people say I, meaning the same human, but it gets conflated with meaning also the same person, and this now is dangerous. But if it be possible for the same man to have distinct incommunicable consciousness at different times, it is past doubt the same man would at different times make different persons, which we see in the sense of mankind in the solemnest declaration of their opinions. Human laws not punishing the madman for the sober man's actions, nor the sober man for what the madman did, thereby making them two persons. So Locke is saying that whilst we commonly use the word I and make it mean person, in the eyes of the law, if you can identify that you were not consciously in control of what was going on at the time, then you are actually treated as a different person. This is the whole idea of, pleading insanity. For Locke, what you're actually doing there is you're pleading a lack of consciousness. It wasn't me. I did not commit those crimes. It was someone else. Okay, this idea of someone else. Okay, so it might sound a little bit odd, but it's much more commonly thought of than we might have originally thought. That most people agree. If you are mad or insane, then you're not responsible for the crimes in the same way that a conscious person would be. Okay. The extreme example of this is multiple personality disorder, where, what Locke would say is more than one person can inhabit the same man or the same physical substance. In this case, the crimes of one of the people or persons in the body shouldn't be paid for by a different one. So, yeah. There's another example for you, but which is somewhat explained by our way of speaking in English when we say such as one is not himself or is beside himself, in which phrases it is insinuated as if those who now, or at least first, used them thought that self was changed. The self-same person was no longer in that man. So what Locke is pointing to here is we actually have some phrases that link to this idea. Anytime you've said, "Oh, they're not themselves today," we're not talking about their physical body, the human form, the substance. They're as much themselves as they are any other day. We don't, look at an amputee and say, "Oh, they're not themselves today." No, when we use that phrase, we're talking about something else. There's something about that person's personality that is not right. It's not their normal personality. Perhaps a different person is in the body, which sounds very strong, but for Locke, well, perhaps that's the best explanation we can give. All right, we skip section 21 here and we go straight to 22. This is where Locke starts to talk about the practicalities of law, and particularly with, for example, being drunk or that sort of thing. More often than not, the law takes the attitude that the same man is the same person. Okay. Now, the reason for this is that we can't measure consciousness in others. And so, what's to stop someone from committing a crime and then standing up in front of a judge and saying, "Oh, I actually wasn't consciously present for that. It was another person that was in my body." Well, Locke sees the problem in this and he says, well, this is why the law, 9 times out of 10 treats the same man, the same physical substance, as the same person or the same consciousness. Okay, so 22. But is not a man drunk and sober the same person? Why else is he punished for the fact he commits when drunk, though he be never afterwards conscious of it? Just as much the same person as a man that walks and does other things in his sleep is the same person, and is answerable for any mischief he shall do in it. Human laws punish both, with a justice suitable to their way of knowledge, because in these cases they cannot distinguish certainly what is real, what counterfeit, and so the ignorance of drunkenness or sleep is not admitted as a plea. So Locke here is talking again. I've said it before about the practicalities of law, and he talks about human law because he's going to be talking about God's law soon. And he says, well, there's absolutely no way to tell whether someone is being genuine or not. If they say they don't remember something, there's no way to test that in any way. And so, as I said before, 9 times out of 10, the law sees the same man, the same physical substance, as the same person. For though punishment be annexed to personality, and personality to consciousness, and the drunkard perhaps be not conscious of what he did, yet human judiciaries justly punish him, because the fact is proved against him, but want of consciousness cannot be proved for him. So once again, we can never prove whether someone's conscious or not. So the assumption is that if their substance is there, then their consciousness was too, even though this may be wrong at times. But in the great day, and what Locke's talking about here is Judgment Day. Great movie. But probably, like, to divert for a moment, controversially, I know, but I'd probably put The Matrix up as a better sci-fi movie, but it's probably my second favorite science fiction movie, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. It's just so good. Anyway. But in the great day, wherein the secrets of all hearts shall be laid open, it may be reasonable to think no one shall be made to answer for what he knows nothing of, but shall receive his doom, his conscience accusing or excusing him. So what Locke is saying here is, well, if we had a judicial system like that of God, where God knows your inner thoughts and your deepest heart's desires, then you could be punished accordingly, but we don't. So the laws of man will operate as if your consciousness is always present in your body, unless there's a really good reason to not see that. Okay, so we'll just have to wait out for Judgment Day for our crimes to be paid for. Or not paid for, depending. And last section 26. In this one, it's really Locke going back, sort of reversing back over the definition of terms. He comes back to that definition of person. This is a really important word for Locke, and so it's not to be misused when you're representing his views. Person means consciousness, and this is not the same as your substance, your physical body. It can be very different. Okay, so 26, person, a forensic term. Person, as I take it, is the name for this self. Wherever a man finds what he calls himself, there, I think, another may say is the same person. It is a forensic term appropriating actions and their merit, and so belongs only to intelligent agents capable of a law and happiness and misery. So, person is, this forensic term, as Locke talks about it. It's another name for self. When you stop and consider who you are, who you consider yourself to be, that is your person. Okay. So what you perceive to be yourself is your person. Okay. That last part there explains why Locke doesn't give the mantle of person to animals, because and so belongs only to intelligent agents capable of a law and happiness and misery. So for Locke, person really is a designation that can only be given to mankind. This personality extends itself beyond present existence to what is past, only by consciousness, whereby it becomes concerned and accountable, owns and imputes to itself past actions, just upon the same ground and for the same reason that it does the present. So, once again, if you can remember it in the past, then this consciousness was there for it and is responsible for it. Okay, so in the same way that your conscious self right now, if you were to do something wrong right now in this instant, you would be 100% responsible for that. Well, you're 100% responsible for the sins that you remember as well. Okay, you can't separate yourself from that just because of a passing of time. If you remember it, you're consciously aware of it. All which is founded in a concern for happiness, the unavoidable concomitant of consciousness, that which is conscious of pleasure and pain, desiring that self that is conscious should be happy. So again, it's sort of, I talked about this before as kind of like our conscious desire. What all of us want is happiness. And therefore, whatever past actions it cannot reconcile and appropriate to that present self, by consciousness, it can be no more concerned in than if they had never been done, and to receive pleasure or pain, i.e., reward or punishment, on the account of any such actions, is all one as to be made happy or miserable in its first being, without any demerit at all. So what Locke is talking about here is the idea of, imagine that you were punished for a crime that you committed in a past life but have no memory of. Well, this would be, as to use the phrase he's about to use, this would be like being born miserable. So we'll continue on. For supposing a man punished now for what he had done in another life, whereof he could be made to have no consciousness at all, what difference is there between that punishment and being created miserable? And therefore, conformable to this, the apostle tells us that at the great day, so again, judgment day, when everyone shall receive according to his doings, the secrets of all hearts shall be laid open. The sentence shall be justified by the consciousness all persons shall have, that they themselves, in what bodies soever they appear, or what substances soever that consciousness adheres to, are the same that committed those actions and deserve that punishment for them. So Locke here is talking about that idea of perfect justice. Perfect justice would be the punishment for crimes committed by your consciousness, and importantly, not having to pay for crimes that you weren't consciously aware of. That would, be great if we could achieve it in human law, but Locke is saying we may have to wait for the end of times to for that to occur. So, be strong of heart, everyone, because on Judgment Day, our consciousness, our self, shall be weighed and measured, and let's hope we're not found wanting. So, thus ends our reading of Locke. Hope you've enjoyed it. He's an interesting character, Locke, an insightful person. But remember, we're doing comparisons between this and the Buddhist scriptures reading and the David Hume reading. So always keep in mind that idea of, well, what would they say to each other? How would their views compare with one another? Okay. Any questions, bring them to class, and I'll see you next time. Like and subscribe, please. Have a nice day.